Hello and welcome to the webinar hosted by QuestionPro. Today we're honored to have Jamie Notter, founding partner and cultural designer at Human Workplaces, who specializes in 25 years of experience in conflict resolution, generational differences, and cultural change to organizations around the world. Joining him today is Anup Saranjan, Vice President of Product and Engineering at QuestionPro, whose personal mantra is to empower businesses and their key stakeholders by providing awesome client solutions and products with over 20 years of architecture and professional services experience. Thank you both for presenting our webinar today, titled Free Remote Health Check, and it is a employee assessment tool to check in on your team's health. So let's go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Esther. This is Jamie. Thank you for having me on this webinar, actually. I'm excited to speak with you guys. I've done it a few times before. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. The topic today about employee remote health check is quite obviously prompted by the situation we find ourselves in right now. You can sort of choose the dramatic metaphor language that you want to describe it. We're either in uncharted territory or unprecedented times, or moving forward without a script, whatever it is. We're going a little overboard, I think, on the metaphors actually. But with all the changes that are going on these days with the pandemic and the different adjustments we have to make internally to deal with it, the one thing that is true is that for most organizations, we made a sudden shift to having either most or in some cases all of our employees work remotely. And that sudden shift is a big deal. And so, I mean, some organizations, obviously, it'll vary depending on those of you out there that are listening to the webinar. Some were already doing remote work to a significant extent. Others were a little more traditional and hadn't made that move. But either way, most organizations were dealing with having some people work from home a few days a week, or maybe a small percentage that are permanently remote. And within a matter of weeks or maybe months, suddenly everyone is remote. And in that environment, we think it's really important that you check in with your employees to see how they're doing. We don't usually bring this much change on our employees all at the same time. And in that environment of change, if you are not paying attention to how that's impacting folks, you're going to start to see a real erosion in productivity and effectiveness, because with that kind of change, there is going to need to be some adjustments. And so if you're not really fine-tuning it, then you can get yourself into big trouble. So this is basically the situation that QuestionPro, like all of us, was in. And so they decided to do something about it. So we actually created up this remote health check assessment, and they actually did it with their employees. So we're going to be able to talk about that experience and how that led us into developing this free offer. So Anup, you want to talk a little bit more about what you guys did and sort of how you came to this point?
Thank you, Jamie, for that context and that background. Yes, we did a couple of things, but before going in there, one more thanks to Esther for that introduction. And knowing that most of you who have signed up are currently either using a digital collaboration tool like Zoom or Slack, it gets, as you know, it gets very hard to do what I call an organizational check-in. And all those messages you see coming in through these chat tools and collaboration tools, Zoom or, like I said, Slack, do not paint a holistic view of your organization's health. And going back to what Jamie was saying, what we did at QuestionPro is we attempted to create this assessment, and which covers these three sections: team support, tools, and communication. Can we move on to the actual assessment itself? Next slide. So, like I said, very straightforward assessment, 3 areas, and essentially an employee can fill this out in approximately 2 minutes. So, Esther, if you don't mind, if you can take the audience through that actual assessment by clicking on that link. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Esther, if you just scroll slowly, 2 questions per section, and the key focus here, like Jamie pointed out, is how can your organization support you during these changes, right? So there are a couple of questions per section, and towards the end, after the communication section, we have an open-ended text area where we ask employees to ideate around how can that organization be, how can they be successful within that remote work environment. Switching back to the deck again, Esther. So what happens after you do this assessment, which can be done essentially through a full service model, there are no strings attached, so we will do this whole thing for you. Is what you get here is a reporting, a reporting tool where you can slice and dice the data by two different areas, which are location and team. And what you see are different hues of colors, color red and color blue. And as you probably guessed, the red teams, the red areas within your organization are not feeling supported, right? So, and the best way to define it is the red is negatively deviating from the overall mean. So we have done this in QuestionPro, and we have a couple of teams globally, as you see here, in India, in Germany, in Latin America, and we see some patterns emerging here. And when we look at it, for example, when we start drilling down into these different teams, and in this example, I have the admin team with responses here. If I start drilling down into this, and just go to the next slide, Esther, we can actually see a breakdown by teams, comments by team. So here you have India and you have marketing team, and the one I drilled down into was the admin team. So if I move on to the next slide, you would see that there were comments coming out from that team, right? So, and if I read this comment out, one of the comments is, since we are in a lockdown for the next couple of weeks, it would be helpful or useful if we provide some sort of certification tutorials to the team. And there's a suggestion coming out saying, I would like a subscription to LinkedIn Learn or Udemy to spend time learning. So this eventually translates into action items which your team member or team manager or exec can take action on, and Jamie will talk about that a little later. But essentially that's what we have done. It's a very quick tool which can be deployed in a short span of time, and you can get results almost immediately. I'm passing on to Jamie here.
Yeah, one thing I'll just chime in on in the data though that I like about the way this is set up is that you set the heat map to be based on your mean, your average score, which I think is really important rather than an objective standard, like everyone should feel this way, because it's more like, no, how do we feel and who's different than that? Who's above that and who's below that? We do that in our culture work all the time, and having the scores zeroed in on the existing experience in your environment is actually hugely important. So I just want to add that comment.
Thank you. Makes sense.
And then, so, and my role, again, Human Workplaces, we partner with QuestionPro around doing deeper consulting work around culture with organizations that are using the Workforce product. And so my angle is on culture, and I just wanted to, as much as I said earlier, and as much as I think it is important that you get in deep with your team and focus on exactly how you can support them now that they're suddenly remote, I just wanted to make the point that work is done in the context of your overall culture work. And particularly in this time of great change, and fill in your own metaphor, your culture is changing whether you want it to or not. Like I just submitted an article to Forbes on this. It's not out yet, but when you make that kind of change to moving your employee remote, you have changed your culture because you have changed the rules of the game, right? You have changed the way people are communicating with each other. You have changed the speed with which they can make decisions. Like you are changing their ability to get their job done. And so when that change happens, then the culture is shifting. And so you have your choice. You can either let it change randomly and hope it works out, or you can actually be careful and pay attention to it, which is what we would recommend, obviously. And as I put up there, when the landscape is changing, data are your friends. Like this assessment that focuses on the remote employees is a critical piece of data, but I want to remind you, that's just one piece. Like, you should have your radar set to look at your overall culture analytics system. Like, how are you paying attention to which pieces of your culture are shifting and which ones are not? How are you understanding which elements of your culture are having the biggest impact on people's success? Like, you have to have a system in place to do that, because if you don't have the data, you will be making stuff up. And if you make stuff up, your people are not going to believe you that that's the right way to go. But when you have the data, as in the example that Anoop just gave, when you can say, hey, we heard from the admin team X, Y, and Z, so we want to respond in this way, that will make more sense to them. So that's hugely important. And the other piece, just that I want to remind, this may be a little depressing in this time, I should have been more positive, but the truth is, most people think you're already doing the culture wrong. Like, this is one of the big epiphanies that I've had, having spent the last few weeks digging into our culture data, our aggregate data set. We have over 1 million data points from about 60 organizations. And what we're finding is there is a huge disconnect between the way cultures operate right now and what employees think makes them successful. And that disconnect needs to be resolved. I will say, a survey like this could really go a long way, because one of the specific patterns we've noticed is that employees feel that the organization focuses at the surface level a lot, but doesn't get to the core, doesn't really focus on helping them develop and solving problems based on their needs. And that's exactly what this particular survey is designed to do. So I would think this would be kind of a pleasant surprise for folks to actually get this kind of a survey, to show that you're not just, I don't know, telling them to listen to the customers more, or doing the stuff that we already know how to do, right? You're really going deep and saying, what's going to make you more successful here? And let's figure out what that is and solve those problems. And then lastly, again, and we've already touched on this as well, but actions matter. If you gather data from folks and you do not do something with it, it's worse than like not gathering the data at all. So be intentional about your action planning. Build a process for actually converting the data that you collect into the actions. It's not just the data themselves are never going to tell you exactly what to do. You're going to have to sit down with some folks and talk it through. So figure out what that process is ahead of time, so that you can come up with action plans that are intelligent, right? Like, you need to make sure you can show some visible changes right away to make it real for people, but also make some changes that are going to make some permanent difference. And knowing how to balance that is really important at a culture level, but I think also in the context of this particular survey.
And Jamie, a couple of things to add to that just before going there, Esther. Well, it's good that you pointed out the action element to this. So at QuestionPro, one of the things which emerged as a theme was one-on-one meetings with your supervisor. That those are getting sparse, rare, and not intentional. And one of the things we did collectively as as part of the leadership team is to actually make that happen. Pre-schedule it, not the water cooler type check-ins, but more intentional. Put that on the calendar and make that happen and make it more visible across the organization, right? So that's something we did something we, for the last couple of weeks, we've been rolling that out, because before it used to be a little more, I would say, organic, things used to happen. Hey, how's it going, Jamie? How are things going with your work? And now it's much more structured. Now, that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to ask you was around the shifting of culture. So do you see, when, let's assume you had a traditional type of organization, do you see that organization, when they go remote, losing some of the core cultural attributes or behaviors? What do you see based on your data analysis? What are you seeing so far?
Well, I think a lot of them, I think the more traditional a culture was going into this environment, the more completely disrupted their culture is going to be. We've gotten some calls recently from some big global organizations that are hugely traditional, and they've been resisting remote workforce for like decades. And suddenly they have like most of their people doing this. And what's fortunate is I think they're kind of waking up to the fact that we're not going to emerge out of this situation in the same place we were when we started. Like, you know what I mean? I think if you were a
And
more futurist organization, you're probably gonna have to make fewer changes, but everyone's
got
gonna
it.
be coming out in a new place. Does that make sense?
But based on resistance itself, do you see that happening more from the employee side, or you see that more happening from the management side with the shift?
I mean, generally speaking, I think management is behind the employees in terms of the shift to, particularly in the sort of remote workforce part of it, but the shift to a more futurist workplace, the employees are consistently ahead. That's what I'm seeing in the data. They're consistently ahead of where management is. And the existing cultures have kind of a traditional base to them that the employees are saying very explicitly, this doesn't work for us. And interestingly, when I work with organizations to try and change that, so far, I haven't finished the data analysis on this, but so far, the organizations go and change the stuff that the organizations already thought were good. They don't address the things that the employees say they need. And so it's something that I'm trying to work with clients now to actually push back on some of their action planning, saying, I'm not sure you're going far enough here. But again, that's just emerging in the research.
Got it. Thanks.
So Esther, over to you now.
Right. Thank you so much, Anoop and Jamie. That was a lot of really wonderful information, and I just love how you are reiterating, both of you, when you say the landscape is changing and data is your friend, and to be able to use the remote health check to do that, I think is such a really great tool. That, you know, the fact that it's free and that anyone can get started is truly wonderful. So let's talk about that. You know, how can we get started with this? So the very simple thing that you just need to do is email success@questionpro.com, and what that does is that it will notify the workforce team to reach out to you to get started.
What would that subject line look like, Esther? What should that subject line look like for the email? Say, send me a remote health check. I want to be
Yes.
in. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Just type in the title, you know, free remote health check, and that will, and then just describe, you know, your situation, what you're looking to do, and what that will prompt our workforce team, is that they will give you, you know, things that you'll need to do. So that includes, you know, sharing the employee roster, you know, who do you want to essentially survey to be a part of the remote health check, confirm, you know, the email body, obviously, you know, how do you prompt your team to send this out, so they will work with you to have the right messaging that you're putting out, because I think that's the other side, and you want to take in the cultural side of that. And then next, the team will be deploying the survey and then sharing the results with you. And as Anoop had mentioned earlier, that, you know, with the aggregate data that we get, with looking at the different means, it really depends on, you know, how you want to analyze it. And so the heat map really gives you a good chance to compare various departments and locations, to identify areas that you can help support your teams across the organization during these times. Anything else you guys like to add to the process, Anoop or Jamie, that will help people with, you know, with them considering to get started?
No, we want to make it as easy as it is, especially for our existing customers and for anybody else out there. A lot of our customers actually started using it with our key success team member, Jeswin. So he's working along with them, and he's seeing a lot of value these customers have, because, you know, we essentially doing some of the heavy lifting already for them, right? So, and we give that data back, and they reach out to the teams who are feeling less supported, which is you know, in this kind of situation, it's you know, a lot of help they value at this point, right? So, and we want to make it as simple as you sending an email, and we take it on from there, right? And our customer success person would work with you to ensure that you have the right kind of messaging going out from your organization to your employees, right? So, again, there's a little bit of back and forth, but we're more than happy to help.
Great. And in terms of like helping with analysis of this, is if people are interested in talking to Jamie about this, can they reach out to Jamie as well?
Jamie, you want to take it on?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help make sense of where the differences are and what they might mean.
Okay, great.
Esther, I just want to point out, we as the company are in a unique position to help, and we have the tools and the knowledge to help. So anything we can do to have that conversation and make that happen, feel free to reach out straight to me or Jamie. You have our information there too, and we can take it from there. Or like I said, if you want to straight away enroll in this thing, it's very quick, painless. As we can make it as painless as possible. Just send an email there. We'll take it from there.
All right, perfect. Next, we do have a few questions from the audience that I want to go ahead and ask the team. The first one I got is, what's the difference between doing the remote health check versus using a different tool like just a simple survey or even Slack?
I guess I'll take that on, Jamie. Is that okay?
Yeah, go.
Yeah. So Slack, as you probably know, is almost like a chat tool, a collaboration tool, which does not do analysis of that data which you collected, right? So you can go ahead, if you have multiple channels within Slack, you can go ahead and ask a question, how are things going? How are you doing? You can ask all these informal questions there. And most of the time, people would not be, open enough to come out in a channel like that because everybody else sees the information. So this is number one, anonymous. Number two, it aggregates data. The heat mapping feature is very unique to us. So you can see this at a kind of a bird's eye view on how your organization is, or how people are feeling supported within your organization, right? So that's kind of the key difference. Again, effective collection of data and analyzing it quickly. The other piece is you cannot see trends over a period of time. So if you ask the same question today versus tomorrow, we also do that. You can have snapshots of heat maps for this week versus next week, or this month versus next month. At QuestionPro, what we do is we run this every 2 weeks, right? Just to make sure we get the data and we can analyze the data. And we have action items which cascades into the next 2 weeks and the next 2 weeks. That's how we plan for it. So we also have town halls where we get everybody online and we say, hey, these are the action items we got from the last survey we ran, last health check we ran, last assessment we ran. This is what we're going to do about it. Only 2 things we're going to do this week, and that's what it is. So it brings that attention. And then when it goes into more thematic issues, that's when I get in Jamie, and we have some idea that's is a possible, long-term cultural impact, and we get him to help us with action planning.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that, actually, which is builds on what you said, this goes back to what I said about data are your friends, but if you're going to do it, you have to be disciplined. You know what I mean? Like, I love Slack and the communication tools. They're great for broad transparency, right? They make a lot of conversations visible to a lot of people, and that's really useful. But that's different than actually analyzing your people data. You know what I mean? When it comes to that, you need a different approach, and like you said, where you can compare week to week or month to month in terms of the results and the trends, and where you can actually keep it anonymous, right? Like, you guys have it set up so that if not a lot of people within a team are responding, it's not going to show up, right? Like, this is like just being disciplined with data, and so it's not that the other stuff is bad, it's just you also need this.
Yeah, that is right.
Great, thank you very much. The next question I have is, who in the organization should be sending these remote health checks to everyone?
I'll start on that one. And I'm sorry, I'm going to sound like a boring, annoying consultant and tell you it depends. But it does. It depends on probably the size of your organization. I don't think really huge organizations should have the CEO sending a pulse check every 2 weeks. But that's for really huge organizations. Most of us in the sort of small, medium-sized business, there's value in having this come from senior leadership, particularly if this is a new thing for you to do. In other words, you haven't done this kind of pulse check before. I like having it come from as senior level as you can get, just to show that this is important if it's new. Now, if it's something that's been a regular part of your culture already, then you probably already have a place for it. It could be in HR, it could be sort of at like a director level, or so, somewhere lower in the hierarchy. All those are fine. But if it's new, I'd get as high up as you can go.
Okay, great. Would you like to add to that, Anu?
No, I mean, our company is categorized as a small to medium. So we have the CEO sending it out.
Yeah.
And the CEO following up with other context behind that and follow through on that. So there's a lot more CEO conversations. So going back to what Jamie said, smaller organizations, we don't have too many leadership. We're much more flatter.
Mm-hmm.
So and plus we have reminders being sent to the tool itself from the CEO, from the CEO email. So if anybody does miss that email, people, we have I think we have almost a 98% completion rate internally, because of that, the reminders combination, CEO sending it out. Again, new stuff. It does, the feedback we've received is they're so happy that we at least ask them how they're doing versus a random message on one of those tools, right? So that's where we are. Esther.
Okay, great. All right, and the last question we have for today is last question here. What do you do next? How do we transition the data into actionable items?
Yeah, we talked about it a little, and I mentioned at one point, when you're looking at the data, when you're looking at the heat map and finding the differences, and then digging into the comments to sort of pull out the more nuanced information, I still don't think that is going to tell you exactly what to do. And so I mentioned building a process. Like, you need to, going into this, when you run this survey, before you even launch it, you should be having a conversation internally that says, who's going to look at the results and what kind of process are we going to go through to decide what to do about it? Like, a big piece of that process needs to be not just saying, hey, here's what people are asking for, but how do you evaluate whether that's going to really move the needle on them being successful? Because there should be some prioritization here, right? Like, they may ask for 127 different things, which is great, but which ones are you going to do first? So you have to be able to have a conversation where you really say, you know what, this got asked for 10 times, but this thing over here that got asked for 3 times, that's going to make a bigger difference in our success, because this is what our customers are expecting, or whatever the environment is, right? So you got to connect your action plan to what's going to make people successful and have the biggest impact. So it's not just doing whatever they say. So you just make sure you build that piece of the process in, even at least talk about it before you start, so that when you get the data back, you can move quickly on it.
Okay, great. And from a real time, or from a real applicable standpoint, Anoop, do you have anything to add for that?
Yeah, I mean, other than the fact that the reports can be accessed at any time after the deployment, right? You can get all the what we call the disposition metrics at any time through the tool. There's nothing else to add. The survey itself, the assessment itself, is mobile friendly, so you can, if the employee is truly remote, on the field kind of remote, they have access to the survey itself, right? And this also ties into our cultural assessments. If you want to tie this back to a culture or employee experience piece of it, we have those features already built in. So in case you want to expand the scope, you can get the customer success team member to help you with that. Or you can actually ask Jamie, how do I tie this back into my overall cultural assessment or baseline, and all that stuff is also included as part of the platform.
Great, great. Well, this concludes the rest of the webinar, but I want to thank Anoop and Jamie for being here with us, sharing
Are there more questions happening in the chat? I think we can still answer them, or you can take those as action items separately.
Yeah, well, it does look like we're running out of time, so what we'll do is we'll take those additional questions and share those with you guys, so we can turn that into a blog piece and share that as an FAQ for everyone to see afterwards. So is that okay with everyone?
Sounds good.
All right, great. All right, well, thank you again for you both to being here today to share your insights on how to run a remote health check. It's great tool for those, that need to get started and check in and see how everyone's doing, especially during these times. It's really simple to get started. So if you want to ask more questions or give it a, start a pilot, do email us at success@questionpro.com, and we'll be here to get you rolling on that. So don't, I would say start as quickly as you can, and we'll be here and happy to help you during this time. So I want to thank everyone again for joining us, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.